Can you hear me? I'm trying to get it up on my iPad so I can see the chat. What the heck was that? It's a brush. There we go. All right. Thank you. I just did the nails. Yep, for sure. We'll give it a little bit to get some people joining in. Alrighty. I think they only look that way, Snow. I think it's the polish I chose with the pointy nails. Yeah. Kind of did them that way because of Iron Lung last night, and also I needed something simple to do because I don't have a lot of time to do them because of class now. I know that username. Secret Shopper. You hear my heater in the background? Sorry. Okay, cool. So, this time round, I am going to be talking about skin tones. I know that some people bring it up in chat a lot, and there's some struggles with darker skin tones. Sometimes there's questions about undead skin tones. I'll go over like my recipes, and I have a bunch of models here with a bunch of different types of skin tones, and I'll explain my process for doing them, um, and we'll go from there. Um, I know most people are familiar with how to do like um, less melanated or more like Caucasian skin tones. Um, the trick I use for doing skin tones like this is I almost always start with like a really, really deep, I guess they call it a flesh tone. I use advanced flesh tone or deep flesh tone from Pro Acryl usually. And then I pick one like mid tone. So I think I actually have. Yeah, so beige red is another one that I like to use as a base tone. And then I will bring that up with either some other sort of lighter flesh tone, an orange, or if I want a darker Caucasian skin tone, you can start with one that's more like this kind of tone. This is the advanced flesh tone. Um, and I use usually either a lighter beige or like, Gengar bumping into my light. Or like here, like a tan flesh, or if I want like a really pale, I start with more of the beige red, and you can go in with like bone or ivory, and I just very gradually add color to it. Um, and you don't want to go up too fast. And I'm using a larger model here just so that it's easier to see on the camera. And with faces, usually there's a few key things that work for both large miniatures and smaller miniatures. And a lot of what I've learned for painting the faces to make sure that like the cheeks look deep enough, and the little line there I'm forgetting the name of between the nose and the corner of the mouth, and just under the lip and the chin there, is I actually use makeup tutorials. You watch makeup tutorials, people do their makeup. It'll usually help you find where to highlight, where the most light's going to be in a general sense. Unless you have more of a like direct light that you know that you want, kind of like this here, I had a very direct light. So up in his hood, there isn't much shaded up in there. Most of that light's down where the light would be hitting on his tentacles. For the general light, usually you want to have it a little bit darker, again on the cheeks, usually up around the hairline. And then that tiny little bit under the lip, things that stick out like your nose, your cheeks, the forehead, the chin. Those are the more prominent areas, and it's broken down when you see people with their faces. And I kind of have, if this will come across, so if you have a face, generally you're going to have your cheeks, and then how dark you make this cheek is going to depend on how gaunt you want someone to look. So if you want them to look gaunt, you're going to make this really, really dark. If you only want like a touch of that light, you're going to do that. Your chin's going to stand out. Generally around the jaw, you're also going to make it just a smidge darker. On her, she's got her robe that comes up, so it's a little bit, you can't really see it there. But on this one, and this is tiny, hopefully we can get this to work. So on this model, so here is where I really like emphasize the makeup tutorial aspect of it. So usually what you do is, if like her jaw there is going to be darker, and as I went toward her cheek where the light is going to hit, it's very, very light. Here I was intentionally like super dramatic, but you can do it more subtly as well. And then her nose pops out, and even like her little chin, if I hold it, yeah, you can see her chin and her lip. And that's generally how a face works. And you can do this for male models too. It's just it's slightly different in the way that you would emphasize which features. So you'd want to like maybe make the jawline pop out just a little bit more than on a female figure, and things like that. And then so like if you have his eye, the eye is going to be, and then generally on men, the eye socket's going to look a little bit darker than on a female, just because you want the brow line to really pop out. One example is sort of the face on this guy. While his eyes are really bright, everything in here is a darker of that brown tone to really make that eye in the center pop, but then also to make sure that his brow line stands out, because I felt like that was a really important piece of this facial structure. And that's one thing to pay attention to with faces, is to make those certain points pop out. And then since we have it out with darker skin tones, I know some people struggle with those. One of my biggest suggestions for this is just to look up reference photos. Look up, different actors. Look up just like a broad range of skin tones or different models that have the specific tone that you're looking for, and then go from there. So this guy, I purposely made him very ashy because he's a version of the Demiurge, And obviously his facial structure has a very um, African American structure. So I made him with a melanated skin tone. And actually had a guy at work who got really excited seeing a model done like this before because he'd never seen anyone paint them like this. But with that, you usually I start with a really warm brown. So I think this one I started with Brian Oxhide to get the very, very dark. If you don't want such a dark one, you can try like warm brown, or I can't remember the equivalent to um, the Citadel version of warm brown. Do I have that? I don't think I do. Or like a mahogany. That one works too because it's got that very ruddy, rich tone. That's always a good place to start with there. Thank you. Um, and I just gradually work it up from there. Again, you can use various shades of brown, or you can even go into using like your beige red and your advanced skin tones, because if you look at references, you'll notice that the light bounces in either a more Caucasian tone or even white, um, or a less melanated tone to white. And adding that little bit there also keeps the skin very warm and not so dark. And it works for smaller minis too. I don't have a smaller one like this, but I do have some Sisters of Battle that I have painted in such a manner. I was asked one time, I can't remember if it was in voice chat or something, somebody had asked about painting purple skin tones. So I brought out my Incubus, because he's the best example I have for purple. um, so with purple, I generally start with like a really deep purple, like a royal purple. You can go more bluey purple if you want less of a um, warm tone, but I like the warmer tones because warmer tones tend to emphasize life, that there's blood running, that there's um like there's life there. The cooler the tones, the less likely it is to be blood, or it'll be more like a reptilian kind of vibe to it, or something along those lines that doesn't have that warm blood running through it. um, and then I just gradually take it up with either white. You can also do like really light blues. I like using really light blues every now and then for that, or even an ice yellow, which an ice yellow works really well for making a highlight on purple skin because it is yellow, which is the opposite side of the color wheel. And then another thing to remember when you're painting your skin tones is not to, and this always rings through my head when I watched Emil's video, it says you don't want skin islands, no muscle islands. So I thought here as well, you can see all the muscles in his chest. And even though I have some here, like right here, where he's kind of floating out there, for the most part, they almost always connect to something else. So like all of his abs come together here in the middle, but they're not like so completely devoid and extra defined. They still look like they're all part of the same body, because that's what you risk when you do these skin islands. And then this orc, it's kind of the same thing with the muscles on there. Yeah, he's a fun model. I actually painted him because somebody made a joke about how I only painted models with boobs, so I decided to go the opposite direction, and then that shut him up real quick. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the things, and I use purple a lot for some skin tones. I kind of want, I'll get into that in just a minute because it kind of goes into my whole with the undead skin. Um, but orc skin, I actually really like painting things that are green skin tone because I just find it there's so much you can do with it, because you can have like the more like mute kind of, I'd say more realistic, like froggish kind of green skin. You can go a bit brighter, and then you could just go flicking full cartoon with your green there. I like to start when I do darker green skin tones like this though. I like to start on a brown base, and then I gradually bring it from brown up to that green, and then depending on how green I want it determines on like, do I stay using camo green? Do I go to a um, uh, or do I, take it just a little bit brighter so that, it's really more prominent green. Like, it's one of my favorite ones to paint. And then also it looks really good when you take green and you mix in just a tiny bit of red in areas like your elbows, the knuckles, areas like that. On this model, I don't have it so much, but oh, I do on the little guy though. So like up on his knee here, or on his elbow, and like even his little boils there, you can put that little bit of red in there, and it makes it pop, and again makes it just feel more alive than if you just left it um, flat green. And then like even on his hands, his knuckles, I've got that little bit of red in there, and around his lip, right there, in his ears. But yeah, and then so this was part of a 10-10-10 challenge. So one model I spent 10 minutes on, or 1 minute I spent 10 minutes. One model was an hour, and one model was 10 hours. And I just thought this was a cute little bust to do it with. But this one also shows an important part of skin is texture. So not everyone's gonna have perfectly smooth skin. um, uh, is texture. So this guy has a lot of texture. It's mostly from dry brushing a bit. But when you do skin tones, it's really important to add texture because, like, even if you just look at my arm, you can see I have all these little spots. There's little bits of red and everything in there. It's going to be the same thing no matter what skin tone you have. So this one I just thought was a good example of, like, this particular green, but I could have put more texture in him. And then I guess again, because I just noticed it, going back a little bit to the face, see, the face is brighter than everything else, so I just made sure to emphasize his chin and his cheekbones that you could see through his helmet to make sure that your eye is brought up to that face. And again, that's like that makeup tutorial kind of thing where you make your chin look shiny, make your cheekbones look shiny. You gotta put that highlight on there. Well, just so you know, Snow, a good chunk of the ones I have here are 3D printed. So I think the only ones I don't have are the Demiurge, this gal, and like my Warhammer ones there. So you should be able to find them. And that texture still matters and carries on into when you do undead flesh tones. I know people have asked, I've seen people ask on the server about it. So this is kind of like my midway between an undead. So this is supposed to be it's the Illithid Lich. I can't remember the proper name for it. Maybe. Um, and with his skin tone, I kind of wanted him to look undead without actually being dead, but I didn't want him to look like a normal mind flayer either because Illithid Liches practice magic, which is actually not good in Illithid lore, so they get shunned out of the community, so I wanted him to look very different from normal Illithids. Yeah, the worm on the head was really cute. That's why I really like that model too. But again, even though it's an Illithid, I was still able to apply like that, making those certain things on his face pop out. So I made his eyes really sunken, but to make his eye pop out, it's green in that pink. And then emphasized his brow line and his forehead area, which I kind of considered like this bit. And then just as it went into the hood, I darkened it up, and I didn't necessarily make it the same color as his hood. I made it his skin tone because, like, even in my hand in the shadow there, like, my hand's not going black. It has its own shadow. So it's going to be a slightly different color than your base shadow color. And then when you get into models this size, generally you put a little bit more emphasis on the fingernails. I've had people point out how grody his fingernails look like on this model before. So generally you do the fingernails, unless you're doing them like solid black talons, which is what I did on my Incubus over there. I usually do really dark at the base up to a lighter tone because it's kind of how nails work unless you want to do them like they're dirty underneath. Um, but with the undead flesh tone, so here I left him very pink so you can still see like much of the life, but does go down into some of those purpley tones, not only because he's an illithid, but because when I do undead flesh, I usually start with a purple base. Even if I don't keep the whole model's face purple, so like with my vampires, to make them stick out on their armor, um, their skin tone, come on, get in the focus, is actually purple. And again, applying those techniques, making sure that their chin, their jawline, cheekbones, forehead popped out. Even on these little models, you can do at least that much. And it still gives you that face shape that you generally look for. So this was like an extreme case of the undead skin tone. What I usually like to do is more on this lich. So here I started with purple more so because I wanted to practice doing a different like shadow color, because that purple pervades all the way around on all of his accessories as well. But I did this and then I went to like a gray tone, but I always put like a tinge of green into it. My personal favorite color to use for that is the dark yellow green from Pro Acryl. Just a tiny touch of this in like a bone color, or even your flesh tone if you want to do like a more sickly color. Um, this works really, really well. Um, and I start mixing like that gray tone and green with the purple, and then I just gradually bring it up to where it's less and less of that purple in there. And with him being a skeleton, it's really easy to emphasize like where his nose is, but you also want to make sure it fades when you get into that middle bone on his nose. And the teeth I made slightly more white. He's a lich. I don't think he'd have grody teeth, so I didn't give him grody teeth. Um, and then just when it came down to his bones, I just made sure that like places that were really close to his armor didn't get as brightly colored as those that are sticking out. Because and then like up here, there's still like a kind of shadow between the two pieces, and that's just to make that also helps all the individual bits stand out so they don't fade together. So like on this one, that's kind of where I goofed. I didn't make like a little line of shadow between her and her little thing here, so they kind of blend, as opposed to him where you can clearly see where his arm is not his arm and the armor is not the armor. This is true. He has all the time to polish his teeth. And with a little bit more of that, and the reason I use purple on the undead, I guess I should say why I like to use purple, is especially when it comes to lich or vampires, they were alive at one point. So even though they may not have living blood in them, they still had blood in them at some point. So under their skin, they would still have that emphasis and like of the blood, that inference of that blood under the skin. So I do them in the purpley tones with the lighter tones on top to emphasize that fact that they don't have that they were living at some point. Like skeletons, I don't do that so much. Zombies, I like to do a bit more of like the greeny flesh tones. I don't think I have. So technically he's a zombie. But like on his leg, there, I did. That was more of like that dark yellow green, and I think I just used bone to shade that up to that whiter tone. Um, and then fun models I like to do sometimes are like when you get to mix all of them together. So here he's a flesh golem, so he's just piecemealed. Um, this here is done entirely with that dark yellow green, and I think I used fluorescent green to bring the details up. And with the skin islands, let me see, flesh islands, bone islands, meat islands, whatever you want to call them. Sometimes that can happen when you do things like feet and stuff, because you forget that there's those tendons and everything there. So you just want to make sure that, like, when you emphasize the dark, you still want to like make it blend and make the parts of what you're painting attach while emphasizing them. Um, and then with his flesh tone, like on his back and stuff here, this again I did. So his shadow color is blue. So what I did is I used, to keep it light and palish, I think I used the beige red, and then I started taking that up with the bright ivory. Yeah. To get the brighter, like paler skin tone. Um, and the purples was, yeah, it's a royal purple, and then I like to use plum. That's what the highlight on that one is. But if you wanted a lighter skin tone, you can use whichever um, color you're looking for. Um, and again, with, I guess this is an example of the muscle islands as well. I just tried to make sure that everywhere there was light, let me see, that they connected at least a little bit. And then I only separated them out when it got to like the very high points of the muscles. Um, uh, I so from here, I think that's most of what I had going on. Did you guys have any questions, or did you want me to like paint a little bit of a sample? I have another flesh column that I could use right up here. Paint? Paint. All right. So I can show you a couple different ones on here. Since he's a flesh golem, we can make up what he looks like. Grab my palette. We'll move the biology notes so that we don't get those covered in paint. Let's do this bone. So this is the bone. Oh, not really. And we'll blend this into the blue because I don't have a spot to put the contrast paint. All right, so we'll kind of look at how I did this kind of skin tone. So when you paint the model and you want to have that different sort of undershadow, like I have here where I have him, he's blue. His shadow is blue. Um, you just kind of want to start on like the next start up and then try to uh, glaze it into that shadow. Um, and when I do a glaze consistency, I test it on my thumb as we go. So if I grab just a little bit of water. So generally I think it's good when you can see the color, but you still see like your skin tone underneath the color. And when we paint this on here, we want to go from like the shadow into the area that we want to have the brighter areas. And at first it looks kind of scary, but it takes a couple layers to get this to sit properly. We're going to go a little bit into the separation of those pectoral muscles. But if you watch when let me see if I can get this up closer. You start from the shadow and go into where you want it to be brighter, and that's because if you watch when I drag my brush that way, that's where it deposits the paint. So generally, if you paint in that direction, you're gonna be a-okay for leaving that shadow as you want it. Get a little bit more purple in there, I think. This, and then with this base tone, that's where you kind of want to make sure that you're connecting all of your muscle areas. So like here, there's this really deep muscle area. So we want to leave that dark, but there's a part right here where they connect. So we'll paint that up in there just so that it's not floating out down here by itself. And then on these models, I've noticed that they really emphasize the stitching. So I always make sure to get that bright around the stitch. And this takes a little time. There was another thing. Was it one of these models? If you mess up on your skin tone or you do an area that doesn't look quite as nice, instead of constantly beating yourself about the head trying to fix it, you could also just make it part of that model's story. So I thought it was one of these models. I can't remember which model it was now off the top of my head. But if you mess it up, you can always like, maybe it's a scar. Maybe they landed in a fire while they were off doing a thing one day. I don't know. You can just give it a story and it's no longer a mistake. It is a happy accident. Yeah, with glazing, it's usually more than two thin coats. But especially since we're going for an undead flesh tone, this blue is going to help us make that look like that desaturated, um, more corpsey flesh tone. This is the first time I've gotten to paint in a while. It's kind of nice. Yeah, accidental battle damage. So we're going to do this. I'm going to add a little bit more purple to that base because that's more of what I was going for anyway. And then what we do is we add just a little bit more of that. I think that was bone I used. Yeah. To it. Still a little thick. Then we're going to go over and then so we're going to do the same sort of thing, but we're going to cover only part of what we've already painted. I know this seems really rudimentary, but like right underneath this little muscle definition here. So we'll go right up underneath that shadow, but we're not gonna completely cover it. And then like up here, we'll get pretty close because like the way that this model is stationed, like that would be pretty light anyway. Just and then if you don't blend it perfectly, don't worry about it because right now we're looking at this model like this. Other people, they're going to be seeing it like this and they're going to think it's amazing anyway. Ah, yes. My Lisa Frank horror guys, yeah. My watch band. I love that watch band. Emphasize up on these pectorals. And we're gonna same thing this way. This is where you might start to get a little muscle islandy, but because we've already connected it a little bit, it's okay. You just don't want it to be like, I have this really dark line between this pectoral and that pectoral. Like, unless you're looking at an anatomical drawing, you're uh, going. It's not. They're not going to show every line definition between every muscle. This in there. And also, if you want to do an out there skin tone, go ahead and try it. The worst you could do is be like, I don't like it, and paint the model over again. Taking chances helps you learn about it. And then we're going to do a little bit more of that bone, and then we're going to start introducing the light ivory to really start popping that paleness in there. That was way too much. That's more like that. That's and then we'll do the same thing again and covering even less space. This little bit sticking out here is wood. So that's going to stand out pretty predominantly against this pectoral muscle. So I'm not going to worry too much if I don't have that dividing line that I was talking about. And up here, there's the emphasis. So I'm trying not to blend the edges of where these stitches are too much. Let me see, can I get that? it's really hard to see. There's like little division, like bumps around the stitches where you would tend to have those kinds of things happen. And just trying not to obscure those, but rather make them pop out, because that'll add a little bit more oomph to the model. Get up in there. Keep that up there. And then with this guy, because of the way his body is positioned, the whole model's going to get darker down toward this area. So we're going to leave that basically as it is right now. So we've gotten to this point, and this is where I would, for this type of model, I would call the highlight. I would call this pretty good here. We're going to give that section a bit to dry up, and then I'm going to go in there with some of just the purple at a very, very, very thin glaze, and we'll go in and emphasize a little bit more of these cracks and add a bit more of that purple back in there. What we can do now, I'll show you. Do another bit. Where does his whole arm? Yeah. So I really like using this straight up for, like, I've done several like lich kind of characters with this green color. Oh, it's lovely. It's a lovely green color. I highly recommend it. And we're going to kind of do the same thing. This time I'm kind of working a little bit backwards here because I didn't dilute the paint. But we're going to... And his hand is downward, so that's my darkest spot, so I'm not going to color the back of it, the inside of his hand. We will color the back of his hand. And of course there's cat hair stuck to this model. Alright. We're gonna fill this in. Without mucking my brush up. And at this point, if I get paint on one of the other pieces that I haven't painted yet, I'm not going to freak out about it. Don't freak out about it if you do that. Only freak out about it if you've already painted an area and it's like white. In which case, I'm sorry. Biceps are another area where you can easily get those skin islands, those muscle islands. So again, just take your darkest color and pop it in there. Even here where I kind of want to leave the blue, this green works really well with the blue. So this is going to look really good once we fill that out. Painting his fingernails. My trick for fingernails, like a model's this small, I don't particularly worry about fingernails. If you're doing a bigger model, however, I recommend painting them your skin tone and then adding your lighter or your darker colors. I have one nail, I don't have a nail on. So, because like it's basically the same as your skin tone and maybe a little bit more red. That's generally why I start it as a dark color at the base, then work out to a lighter color. So like here we would add a little bit of pink, and then we would start adding like ivory. So a little bit of pink and then ivory to our base skin tone to make the color of the nail as it goes out. I very nearly put green on that chest. That would not have been good. Is a hair on there and it's driving me nuts. Okay. Well, let that green dry, and while we'll do that, we'll take this purple and we can add just a smidge of our bone and a smidge of the green, since those are all in there. It really takes very little green, since green and purple can kind of cancel each other out and make a skin tone. So I'll take this. Yeah, that's just about right. So people often ask what's the consistency of glaze, and I've heard the term skim milk used. But with this purple, you should really be able to notice it. If you can see this, these are the glazes we've done thus far. And with that, and you should be able to do this with, you could use a bit of paper, you can use whatever. You just want to be able to see that color, but still see the color underneath through it. Is my best advice to getting that glaze consistency. And what we want to do with this is we kind of just want to try and keep it in those shadows. Both reinforcing those shadows, but then also it'll kind of help blend that a little more. And you can kind of swish this back and forth to get it to however you like it. Around things like these stitches, I'll actually come in here with like a more like translucent magenta. So Pro Acryl's magenta is like almost absolutely perfect for this. But I'll go in around the stitches to add a little bit of irritation, because he's a flesh golem. I think even though there's some undead flesh there, he might feel some of it still and show some irritation. But we'll add a little bit of this around there. But we'll, yeah, just glaze in those purpley tones. Thinking about it, a flesh golem was the perfect thing to paint for this little class, because I can do lots of things on it. And then that's generally how I approach, like if you just want like a pale undead skin tone, and then I just add, like I said, those little glazes of purple in there help emphasize everything while still keeping it fairly pale and corpse-like, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. And we've got his green arm here. Should be good to go now. So my favorite way to do this is actually just to start taking it up with ivory. You can do this with any color though. If you want to use a pale blue, use a pale blue. If you want to use ice yellow, use ice yellow. There is no limit to what you can do, and you can get some really interesting effects. Because if you say want more orangey light, then you can actually add fluorescent orange to your highlight color, and it'll give it a really nice effect that way. So here, what we're gonna do is just real carefully, let me water that down just a smidge. So this is a little bit thicker, and that's kind of what I want. It's fine. And you want to make sure you grab the top of the knuckles. So like this guy's finger here, you can see like the shadow there kind of lines up perfectly with how you'd want to shade that. So you want to grab it just below that knuckle and then pull it down onto the hand, because then it emphasizes where that knuckles shadow is and that there's a division, but that uniting color underneath kind of helps keep it from being a completely different like entity, I guess. but you want to put the light on top of the knuckle to make that knuckle pop because that would catch the light really well. There is some veins in his hands, and we'll worry about those in a minute. Oop. This, and then because the shadow part is under his hand, I'm just keeping to the top of his knuckles here. When you turn it around the other way, you should be able to see like a little bit of the light come around on like these main fingers, but you're not going to get a ton of light down on this side. So so here's kind of where we stop with that color, because this muscle underneath, we painted it so that it matched, so it didn't look like it was floating by itself. But when we put the model this way, it's hard to show you that. This muscle actually ends up like disappearing into the shadows, kind of like how you see this all blue and it goes into like this black. This area is pretty much untouched. Like I pulled it a little bit onto the side of this one, which I need to smooth out, but most of that area is covered in shadow, so you're not going to see it when you have it down on the table. This up here. Missed a little bit in there. And then we just keep adding our lighter tone. And you can do this in as many steps as you want. I take it in fewer steps because I like to have a bit more control over how bright it gets where I'm going. If you have it thin enough, you can usually just get away with going from one fairly bright tone to the next. My brush is really dry right now. And then as we paint this highlight, we kind of want to look at where we're going with that, because on our next pass through, we're probably going to get to really narrowing where that focus of the light is. So now we're going to emphasize mostly up on his knuckles, maybe the very tip of his finger there. And this is where a little bit of that texture idea also comes in. So you can kind of see it, but he has veins here and on the back of his hand. And then like when you, I don't know if I can get my hand to grip that hard at the moment. But you have those tendons that come down from your knuckles. You can see those on his hand as well. Come on. So we're going to try and keep our highlight to those little areas. That little skip there, we're not going to worry about it. Why? Maybe it's a vein that's protruding, because we have some other veins over here. And to get these little details, I don't use really, it looks like I'm using the tip of my brush, but I'm using the side of the brush. Like that's a really big trick that everyone talks about and is actually quite helpful. I apologize for the cat. Don't know if you can hear him, but he may start wailing here in a hot minute. I'm sitting here trying to see what the thing looks like, and I'm looking at the wrong screen. And then we're going to take a little bit of that. Yes, Bruce, we understand that you are the true expert. Mm-hmm. And just very little up on this arm, because there's so much going on around it, you wouldn't have too much light going up on that guy anyway. There was a sad, what? Sad one. No, that's just Bruce. Bruce just sounds like that. Don't you? Wherever you went. Little hellion. Put my foot down. He was under my leg. And then that's how I do like the super green ones. I couldn't find any of the models that I have done this before. It's almost like what I did. I guess I can use the same model on his shorts. I just didn't take it as bright of a highlight on the shorts. We can do, where's my mahogany? That's mahogany. White umber, dark umber. Where's mahogany? Mahogany. Yeah, now, this is Bruce's mild whining. When he really gets going, he sounds like a fire truck. So that's always fun. So Mahogany by Pro Acryl is another great color I suggest picking up. It's a very deep red brown. It's brilliant. I love that color. Ow, that's my back. What's it doing? Is that the same color? That's the same color. Put that out again. Okay, so then with the darker skin tones, we're going to do the mahogany. Another trick to glazing, I just realized I just did it and I didn't think about it, is when you first make your glaze, you want to take like everything that's in your brush and dab it out on like an ever so slightly damp paper towel, and then pick up more glaze, because then you won't have an overload of paint on your brush. It's a very, very good trick to know. Just doing this to try and blend the edge just a little bit better. I made it too wet right there, so now the paint's not sticking. Alright, so we got this in here. Because I don't want you guys to wait forever for this to dry. Wow, that hand's not like my paint stick. I'm gonna hair dryer. My apologies. My cat, he was whining the other day and riling up my nan's dog because he went looking for the she went looking for the cat and couldn't find the cat because she heard a cat. That's good. All right. So we've got our mahogany base. It's my favorite place to start on with this type of skin tone. And then I actually take warm brown just as it is. I don't even like mix any mahogany into it because they're really close. And we're just gonna emphasize, again, usually the emphasis that you're gonna place on your muscles is either places that are really highly raised or like joints, because like when you come into it, like here with this one, like there's all, you can see all that messiness of muscle and bone going about. So generally keep on top of that stuff. We'll go back here on top of this muscle. And then again, if I can get it to focus on it, right up in here as well. And generally it's only the top surfaces. I'm going a little bit on this guy because you can see a little bit. And we'll get the edge of this arm in here. All right. So we're going to take our brown and take a teeny tiny little bit of ivory and mix that in. This one I do take my time to try and go up in layers because it can be really easy to mess that up. That makes sense. My cat can wander freely because it just upsets him more if we lock him out of places. I probably could have gone that a little bit brighter. Just a teensy bit. That wasn't a teensy bit. Oh, that should be a little bit better. We're just gonna, and along, like, so here, this is where, like, I believe, so like this is your tibia and fibia. So you kind of want to emphasize that little gap, but don't leave it like huge. You still want to like connect them down by the wrist and connect them up by the elbow, because that's how those, the bones and then the muscles on top are gonna work. And we got another little like elbow bumps here. So we just start placing those around that without completely disconnecting all of that. And you also, if you feel it doesn't look right, go ahead and look up reference of muscles, like anatomical references and things like that. If it doesn't look right, it's probably, it doesn't look right. The human eye is really good at detecting when things are wrong. That's how you get that uncanny valley thing. It's that we're really good at recognizing our own kind. So when something looked off, it's probably off. Just a teensy bit down there. Right, and then here, so we can see those shadows and it's starting to pop up, but we're not going too quick and we're not going like so far bright that it doesn't look right. So we're gonna add just a teeny bit more ivory. again, emphasis is probably going to be more down on this wrist and then up along this line of this muscle. There, a little bit up there. Teeny bit there. Right. So then if we wanted, we could stop there. That looks like a really big jump on camera, and it doesn't look that big in my hand. But you could stop there. Let me. If you have any big jumps, or looks like big jumps, like right here, that's definitely a big jump on the inside of his arm there. You can do that same trick where you take the glaze and you bring it from the shadow up to that line. And doing that will help it blend a little bit better. You're just going to have to give it a minute to sit without fudging the paint too much, where you can end up peeling the paint up a little bit. I hope this is all helpful, by the way. So you could stop here. On the Demi-Urge here, I gave him a more ashy tone, so I went with a white. But if you look up references and you look up photos, generally you can either stop here or you can go higher and do like really bright spots in either an ivory or a even up to a white, because the light reflects so well off of melanated skin that it looks that bright. Like it just does. When I first started trying to do skin tones like this, I was like, about going that bright on the tone, but it really does if you look at photos. And some people think references are cheating. Some people are like, you shouldn't use references. You should just know that no. If you don't know what it looks like, look it up. It's fine. So we're getting these little bright spots now. And they really pop. And you can leave them really poppy. Some skin, like mine, right, and depending on the area of skin, if this dude, like, he's a football guy, maybe he's all sweaty, so he's gonna look kind of shiny. Some people's skin is oilier than others, so it's gonna look kind of shiny. Like, there's no, people fear messing it up a lot more, but there's no need to, I guess. Pupper is sad though, Snow. He wants in. He wants to come say hi. Yeah. And then again, just a little glazing trick, just in very smaller, much smaller swishes to kind of blend. And then if using the lighter color and blending isn't working super great, what you can do is go back to the tone you had before. So like mine, it's in there somewhere. In this sort of section here that I blended out, I could go back and grab that color and then glaze it the opposite way. So from the lighter portion to the darker portion, as opposed to the darker to the light. It just generally, you can obscure things a little bit more easily that way, and so you might not want to do that. But yeah. And then to blend these out, I'm literally doing teeny tiny little like tippy tappies just around the edge. And then when you're doing lighter skin tones, don't be afraid to change that base tone. So there's one I actually like to use. It's called Olive Flesh. So I will do like a tiny bit of this with like the tan flesh or the red beige, and this olive flesh, if I put it next to the ivory, maybe you can see. It's just like a little bit more brown, but I've gotten very nice like Mediterranean olive-ish tones. And you can even use this same green, this dark yellow green shade, into this and the flesh tones that go with it to get that olivey tone as opposed to that. But like if you see that next to the ivory, and then if you put it next to like tan flesh or just, where the heck is my normal flesh tone? I guess it is tan flesh. If you see it next to tan flesh, you can definitely see the difference. But it gives you that cooler olive Mediterranean tone. You could even use the tan flesh as a base for that, and with a teeny, and I mean teeny tiny bit of green in there, it helps give that effect as well. But like, just don't be afraid to add other colors to your skin tone. And like, if you're doing an icy model, you can do that same thing. And then when you do icy models, I wish I had a photo of it I could show you guys. I painted Patton for my dad. It was a scale 75 model, and it was him in Normandy during the winter, so there was all kinds of snow. And so when you do a snowy model to help sell the skin tone and that the model is actually in that place, what you can do is just add, because she's the best, what you can do is you could still paint it like this, but you add a little bit of extra red to like the tip of the nose and across the cheeks, because that's where wind and everything's going to hit the face, and it's going to make it look colder. It's a really good little tip on that one to remember. That's bothering me that this isn't blended now, but yeah. So then there you get the really sharp highlights. Maybe he's really sweaty. Maybe he's just got oily skin. Maybe, whatever it is. And then if you don't like that and you want to kind of tone it all down, you can grab whatever your mid-tone was. You don't want to grab your base color, which was the mahogany, but we can get like this middle color we made with the warm brown. Glaze that up. A little bit more of the, yeah. And you can just glaze over the whole thing. This will blend it a little bit more. The only thing with doing this is you want to make sure it doesn't get stuck in some of those crevices, because it can obscure your shadows a little bit. But it'll help it blend. It'll tone down that mega highlight we did. Once the glaze dries, that'll be all right. Is there another tone anyone in the chat wants to see? I can attempt to do. Some more of the green. Okay, so I'm gonna with this one. I'm gonna do, how bright a green do we want? We want real green. Do real green. I got fluorescent green. What green do I have right here? I got these greens. Okay, so some of these colors we're already gonna have on our palette. So with the green, what I'm going to do is, because if we're going to do a green, I don't usually start with this color, because I do that for more of like I said, the natural green, or like a froggy kind of green is where I start with something like mahogany or something like that. What we got? We'll do his foot. Why not his foot? Well, the foot on the other one's already green. We'll do this chunk on his back, I guess. So we'll just grab this same green. We'll just start with that. Maybe I'll get the hairdryer again. I didn't do purple. No, that was the next idea. I'll do the green. Sorry, I got my brush in my mouth. We'll do the green, and then we'll do purple. Purple. And not like flesh tone purple. Do another quick coat of that to cover that up. Okay. So I'm starting off with this green. You can use whichever green you want. Since we're going to do this greener green, I'm just going to take straight up green. Then to show a little bit of that fluo I was talking about. That was way too much. Oh well. So again, I like to take some of the base color, mix in this color first, because then that transition isn't as transition isn't as jarring. And again, the same rules. Don't cover all of that other green, just the parts that are going to be really covered in light. Alright, give that a second. Just a little bit more of this. And then sometimes don't worry about the paint underneath not being quite dry as well, because it helps the blend a little bit. If I turn the model like this, I'm just making sure that I'm hitting the light the right way. Another thing I do while I paint is if I know where I want my light source to come from, so these are just, they're football players. They're outside. The sun's coming from above. It's your stereotypical, light sources, noon in the middle of the day on a cloudy day. I pay attention to where I have my painting light above. I pay attention to where the shadows hit. So I put it more directly under the light, and then I watch where the light hits, and that's where I paint. Kind of like what Zenithal can help you with figuring that out when you do the Zenithal highlight. So we've done that. We should be good to do a little bit of the green, yeah. Straight green. And then you also don't necessarily have to worry about blending it with the skin tone, because again, whatever you don't blend is going to add texture to your skin tone, which makes it look a little bit more realistic. So when we do this orc skin, maybe what we'll do is we'll add some like orcish liver spots, which I tend to do in like a brown because it works really well with their skin tone. Pop up in there. So now we get to the crazy stuff. So we're going to take this green, and we don't necessarily do just the straight fluo. And at first on my palette, it looks like this is doing nothing. But once we see it on the model, we're going to see how it brightens things. That's a little bit wet. So we got our big old green orky shoulders there. So then we can take this with the fluo in it. And again, at first it's not going to look like it's doing much. But once we get to actually having it be primarily that, the fluo by itself isn't going to have enough oomph to really stand out. Because it's such a thin kind of paint. But this is the same technique I used, and I can show you these on the pumpkins I did on some of my zombies and ghouls for this same team. But doing this fluo is going to make the highlight pop without like changing it to have to be like a white or an ivory or an extra yellow. And if you want this extra green, you can use more yellow in it. Like, the yellow is really gonna add to that green tone as well. So just by adding that fluo paint to the mid-tone, look at how bright those shoulders have gotten already. It's a really neat trick that I recently learned. And I did the same thing with these guys, this pumpkin. While leaving those ridges of the pumpkin in there. I think this guy, you can really see up next to his on his face. But just adding it around where that direct light was hitting was really good. Pop on there. Plus, it gives you more of a reason to use your fluos than just, here, I want to make this look bright under highlight. Or black light. But now that those have dried a little bit more, you can see how that really made those shoulders pop. And again, this is with the green undertone. You could do the same thing. I think I used a little bit of yellow down on this guy instead, but they're actually the same skin tones, this guy and this guy. But I used I think I did a straight green base on this instead of the brown like he has up here. So that alone can make a huge difference. And then adding little bits of yellow to the highlight areas can have almost not quite the same, but very close to a similar effect. Yeah, that too. And like under normal light, no one's gonna see the fluo effect. It's just, it looks like a really bright highlight, especially on this one. And we can do purple. So I like to start with a royal purple. That's like a nice middle purple. We'll do his little foot purple. And again, I'm just trying to keep with my theme of, like, you could paint his whole foot purple. I'm just trying to keep with what I was doing on these models where the shadows are blue. So we're gonna paint him. All his little toe beans. Big old toe beans, probably. Um, I'm gonna do the plum purple. I'm gonna do that on the other guy. We'll do the ivory one, I guess, this one. So going from this royal purple to plum is how I got this guy's purple chest. Um, this guy was the purple with ice yellow, I believe. And the closest one I have for Pro Acryl that I have out right now is going to be this bright ivory. And if you don't have the exact colors, don't worry about using the exact colors. Yeah, I have so many Blood Bowl teams. The only one that's living is the Bretonians. I'm so excited. I want to get to my Tomb Kings. It'll happen eventually. So we're going to take this purple and I'm going to put it down here because I've surrounded that purple. And we're going to add some ivory. That was way too much. And don't be afraid of mixing your colors. Oftentimes your colors looking smooth, even though you have special sets. Like my favorite is, what was it? Dark Jade, Jade, and Light Jade from Pro Acryl. I still end up mixing the two, like the Dark Jade and the Jade together before I go straight to Jade. Like, don't be afraid to mix your colors because doing that is just going to help you blend everything better and then even make everything match a little bit better. There was one set of models I did where every color had some amount of Rhinox hide in it, and it made the whole thing, even if it was just a very little bit, it just made the whole piece, like, they looked very united. Yes, the undead. I was like, oh, I don't have any models I can paint skin tones on. I've got my necromantic horrors. I haven't built my vampires, and ghosts aren't going to be useful, and neither are the Kriegsguard because they don't have any flesh showing. So I'm like, we got a flesh golem. It'll work. It'll work. So these aren't terribly. If I paint that really close to that a little bit, they're not terribly the same. But again, usually when you end up blending, especially since I'm using a wet palette, your paint's going to be slightly thinner regardless because of that all that extra water that's in your brush. And so that's just going to help us. I'll paint all his little toesies and try and get this line up along here. Down along the edge of his foot. He's got some gnarly veins going on his foot. And then again, so when it comes, so him, you can like really just see, I don't know if you guys can see it, but yeah, his toe is his toenail is very, very defined on that foot. So I just kind of leave a little bit of that gap, and then I just get the very tip. So you can still see that line where his toenail is. Um, and when I kind of shade, I almost do it kind of like just dry brushing with the side of my brush a lot of times. I just drag the side of my brush down, and that helps it both blend and spread the paint about without messing up the tip of your brush too much. Yeah, I've got this one, Tomb Kings, Bretonians, and the vampires. And honestly, I bought this guy. I bought this set literally because of this model. I just wanted to paint the spooky skeleton zombie, scarecrow zombie. And then there was one really goofy looking guy on the vampires, and I was like, yes, I want to paint him as well. So then here is where I start maybe getting a little bit more precise, trying to hit just the tops of his knuckles, his foot knuckles. And then when I go here, I don't necessarily connect all those highlights on his toes and his knuckles. Start making those big ass veins stick out. Drag this down. And then on the side of his foot, I'm not taking the highlight all the way down to the bottom of his foot, because that's going to be it's in the dirt. It's in the muck. I don't need to be there. And generally whether it be skin tone, armor, whatever else, a little tip I like to do when I'm painting the bases in to really make the models feel like they're on the base is I take a little bit of either the paint, because sometimes I might do a dry brushing over the base, or the powder, you can't even see that, the powder that I'll use on the base, and I'll bring it up a little bit onto the feet or the legs of whatever I'm painting, and it really helps them settle into the piece. Like they really, really belong there when you do things like that, because it's like the environment is actually interacting with the model. Same thing with like it's really easy to do that on dusty stuff. On snowy bases, I do the same thing. So if somebody's moving about a lot, he is. I just thought he was adorable. I think it was the hat and the pumpkin combo. Like it had to be the hat and the pumpkin combo. Like, come on. uh but yeah. So then yeah, you just keep slowly building this up as bright as you want. Like this is on his leg, so I wouldn't necessarily make it as bright as I have made it already. But it is the foot that's sticking out way out there, so can't hurt. And you can see on my palette, the more ivory I add, the more like pink this is getting. If you don't want to do like a pink highlight, I would suggest like a really, really, really light blue. Like I have one by Pro Acryl, I think it's called White Blue. And it's like white with the faintest touch of blue to it. Or if you want to go wild, you can use something like a really pale green. If you want it to super stick out, you can stick with this and do like a yellowy. Yeah, so this is the blue. The white blue. Something like that is really nice for doing like cool highlights. Get a little bit more of that. Just the very, very tippies of all the things. With this one. On that vein. A little bit on the side of the foot, not too much. And yeah, so then there's like, there's like a purple. That's straight purple with just the ivory. I tend not to use a lot of the tricolors unless like I have a very good reason for using the tricolors, because I like to control the amount of highlight I have between one color and the next, and it can really help make sure everything is cohesive. So then back here, I had mentioned texture. I just forgot of like some little spotty guys on his skin. So because we took it so bright, we could probably just go back to our base tone, this little deep green here, and we can go just little spots. They don't even have to be like really consistent. Just typically little spots like this, if you're not just doing them for the sake of bloody doing them. I don't know. You can kind of see those on there. But just those tiny little spots just to kind of break up that sea of green. And they don't have to be perfectly circular. Not all the spots that people have on their arms are going to be perfectly even everywhere, so that's fine. Generally, I would do more of this on models that have a history of like a lot of sun exposure, or a lot of they're out in the sun, or they are sunburnt, because I know for me, all of my freckles darken in the sun, and I get more freckles up where the sun hits. So typically you'd leave those for like across the face, top of the shoulders, maybe a little bit down on like the higher points of your lower arms. Um, that's when you're gonna pop in like those little spotty textures. Also, if it's an elderly model, you can get liver spots up around the sides of the hairline, and here and there along their hands and things like that. So again, just my biggest advice for any of this is to look at reference and just try it. Don't be afraid to throw paints together on a model, even if you're not 100% sure how it's going to turn out, because you may really like it. Um, and uh, just experiment with it. And then, like, if you really want it to match the environment, keep in mind, like, is it a really warm sun? Is it a really cold light? Is it uh, if it's a frosty planet, and on top of just adding things to make it look cold, like the tip of your nose being cold, or your cheeks or being red, and your cheeks being red. If a model looks like they've been standing there for a little bit, or has a very stationary pose, sprinkle some snow on top of that guy. It's gonna look real good. Just to like merge your pieces into their environments and what they are a little bit more. But is there any other questions or anything else anyone would like to see that I can try? Okay. Well, if nobody has anything else, I hope that this was helpful. And if you're in the Discord, you can hit me up if you have some questions. And yeah, I hope you have a good night. I will have a good day because it's 11 in the morning, nearly noon for me. Yeah, well, see you guys later. I'm glad you had fun. Bye.